Friday night I was out in my backyard and looking at the trees. It was maybe an hour or so before sunset, and there was just this expansiveness and wonder, and I felt that in your song this morning. I heard that in the daily word this morning, Isaiah looking at the sunrise, and sometimes nature just takes us right home. Yeah. I love Guthrie. When I hear his name, I think of Alice's restaurant. That was lovely, really lovely. So this morning, we're going on a Bible exploration and a metaphysical interpretation from the Gospel of Luke. We know that the Bible is a collection of books, and there are many stories within each book. The Old Testament contains the Hebrew Scriptures, and those are the books that Jesus studied and knew so well. And then in the New Testament, we find many books, but the Gospels are included there too. The 4 Gospels were written by different people at different times, and all of them were written after Jesus had died. Luke was written sometime between the year 85 and 100. All the Gospels revolve around Jesus' life and his teaching, but each author tells the story in his own way. Much like you and I might tell the story about spring fling last night in a different way. I might talk about certain people, you might remember some other people that were there. I might talk about the desserts, you might talk about the incredible art. All that depends on our voices and who we are, how we perceive things, and the message that we want to give from our own perspective. So that's the truth of these 4 Gospels too. Luke was a travel account kind of Jesus' life. It tells the story of Jesus starting with his conception and his birth, his years in ministry, and on through the crucifixion, the resurrection, and the ascension. Chapter 3 actually lists his ancestry, and the genealogy that Luke gives differs from the one that's found in the Gospel of Matthew. Matthew traces Jesus back through his lineage to King David and stops with Abraham. So that's highlighting his Jewish ancestry. But Luke takes Jesus even farther. He goes through David and Abraham all the way back to Adam, the Son of God, in order to emphasize that Jesus is the Savior for all human beings, not just Jews. There are many parables in Luke's stories about Jesus, and a lot of them go back to the Old Testament. They're stories that revolve around the prophets from the Old Testament writings. And when they do this kind of thing, I think the term is historiography. It's kind of a blending of details and facts and fiction, and bringing things from history to the story that they're writing about. So those details aren't necessarily what actually happened. Authors and storytellers do that sort of thing all the time. They like to join characters and create compelling stories and make a point with what they're writing about. So, for instance, in Luke, when Mary learns that she's pregnant, she starts to sing. And that's exactly what happened in the Old Testament, in the book of Samuel. When Hannah discovers that she's pregnant, she bursts into song. And Hannah is pregnant with the prophet Samuel. Another example would be from chapter 7 in Luke. They tell the story of Jesus rising a young man from the dead, and this young man was a widow's son. And that's a repeat of an Old Testament song or story found in the First Kings, the story of prophet Elijah raising a widow's son from the dead. So Luke's agenda is to portray Jesus as a Jewish prophet. What's a prophet? We might think that a prophet is someone who can see the future. That's kind of how we think about it today, but that's not how it was then. And in the Old Testament days, a prophet was more important than a king. And what he did was not foretell the future. A prophet's task was to call people back to God, to remind them. A about the presence and power of God, and to warn people about the consequences of their actions. So today's scripture that I want to talk about is from Luke chapter 15, and it's the parable of the lost son. I'm sure many of you have heard of it as the parable of the prodigal son. Prodigal is a word that means wasteful, reckless, extravagant, but I renamed it today. I'm going to call it the parable of the lost child, so it's gender neutral. That way we can all feel included. To prepare for this message today, I did a lot of reading in the book of Luke, and I have a lot of other Bible references at home, so I like to explore a little bit. I want to know the context. I want to know what came before, what came after, who these people are, what the customs are of the day. And I want to show you the Bible that I use, and that when we take Bible classes through Unity, this is the Bible that is recommended. It's the New Interpreter's Study Bible, and it has a lot of commentary about the history and what's going on. It's a very big book, but very good. So let's set the scene. Chapter 15. The chapters before and after this are centered around Jewish law and customs concerning the hospitality and the practices of sharing meals with others. And Luke emphasizes Jesus' message about taking care of the poor, about being present for the oppressed and people who are outcast from society, including women. Jesus loves and accepts everybody, and he wants people to include and accept all of humanity. This is a time in his ministry when Jesus is gathering disciples. He's teaching about God as a forgiving, loving, and gracious presence, a God for all people. Large crowds surround Jesus, and they come to hear him speak and witness the great healings that he is doing. So, Jesus is invited by a leading Pharisee to come to a big formal banquet. Jesus is an intelligent and well-educated man, and he has enough position and status in the community to be invited to a gathering like this. And at the dinner, the guests are all seated according to their status and their wealth and their rank in society. Who you share your meal with and where you sit are very important. They're important indicators of your social status. The upper class, the Pharisees, they're very concerned about this social status. But Jesus had views that, about hospitality and seating arrangements that were quite different from that. So chapter 15 follows this big banquet, and it begins with, now all the tax collectors and the sinners were coming near to listen to him. And the Pharisees and the scribes were grumbling and saying, this fellow welcomes sinners and eats with them. They questioned Jesus about his views to include the poor people and the sinners and the outcasts. His ideas are in opposition to the social and religious norms of the time and the boundaries that they follow. So Jesus tells a few stories along the same theme to illustrate his point. The first story, and I'm sure you've heard this one, is about the shepherd tending a flock of sheep, 100 sheep, and one goes missing. So he takes his herd of 99 and gets them into a safe location, and then he goes back and searches for the one lost sheep. And he finds it and puts it over his shoulders and carries it back. And when he gets back, he says, hurrah, I found my sheep, let's celebrate. And people join in and celebrate that the lost is found. It's a wonderful thing to find something that's lost, isn't it? We can all relate to that. My husband is a great loser of things. He misplaces keys and sandals and slippers, but he's got a great attitude about it. He says, it's not lost, it's just temporarily misplaced. But when something really is gone and lost, we can have deep emotion about it. Just think for a minute if your pet went missing, how you would feel. But then if a neighbor found your pet and brought it back, think how you'd feel then. Very joyous, right? And you'd say to your friends and neighbors, "Hurrah, my pet is back. Let's celebrate." The second story that Jesus shared was about a woman with 10 silver coins. Now, 10 silver coins was a lot back then. It was probably her life savings, and she lost one of the 10 coins. So she lights her lamps and sweeps her floors, and she's looking for this lost coin frantically. And she finds it eventually, and she too goes to her neighbors and friends. "I found it! Hurrah, let's celebrate!" We've all been in her shoes, I think, searching for something in our homes, and when it finally turns up, it is cause for celebrating. Jesus told the crowd a third story, and this one's a bit longer, but it's the same theme. And I want to share it with you straight from Luke chapter 15, verse 11 through 33. I think it's good to read from the Bible now and then, don't you? Then Jesus said, "There was a man who had 2 sons. The younger of them said to his father, 'Father, give me the share of the property that will belong to me.' So he divided his property between them. A few days later, the younger son gathered all he had and traveled to a distant country. And there he squandered his property in desolate living. When he had spent everything, a severe famine took place throughout that country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to one of the citizens of that country, who sent him to his fields to feed the pigs. He would gladly have filled himself with the pods that the pigs were eating, and yet no one gave him anything. But when he came to himself, he said, 'How many of my father's hired hands have bread enough to spare? But here I am dying of hunger. I will get up and go to my father, and I will say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. Treat me like one of your hired servants.' So he set off and went to his father. But while he was still far off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion. He ran and put his arms around him and kissed him. Then the son said to him, 'Father, I've sinned against heaven and before you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son.' But the father said to his slaves, 'Quickly, bring out a robe, the best one, and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. And get the fatted calf and kill it, and let us eat and celebrate. For this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found.' And they began to celebrate." Okay, the story doesn't end there, but we're going to pause there. This young man asked for his inheritance, and the father gave it to him, and then he went off to a distant country and wasted all the money. Can you imagine that? Did you ever do anything irresponsible in your life? Especially when you were young? What do young people do? Teenagers and young adults, okay, maybe not all of them, but some of them, what do? They mess up, right? They crash their cars, they lose their cell phone in the swimming pool, they change their major 2 or 3 times in 1 year. You know, they do things. They flunk out of school, get in debt. But that's how young people learn, by making mistakes. That's how we all learn, isn't it? By making mistakes. We learn and we self-correct. In fact, that's the definition of sin. Sin is to miss the mark, to make a mistake, or just to hold an error thought. As I was thinking about this young son, I remembered a joke, and it goes like this. When I was a little child, I thought my dad was incredible. He was so smart. He was almost like God. He was so smart. He knew everything. And then I became a teenager, and I wondered what happened. He didn't know anything, right? And then I grew to an adult, I got married, had a child of my own, and now I'm surprised at how much my dad learned in that time. I wonder about the judgment of this dad in this story, giving the whole half of his inheritance to the son. I don't know if that's wise or not, but anyway, he missed his son while his son was away. I can't imagine what that must have been like, that your son takes off and to a distant land and there's no Skype and no telephone and you don't know when he's coming back. It would be hard. If you are parents and you've had to say goodbye to your child on the kindergarten school bus, that's hard enough, isn't it? So the father sees his son when he's still quite a distance off, and that tells me that his dad has been hopeful and watching and anticipating and maybe holding that his son would come back someday. And he sees him and he just can't wait. He runs to him and hugs him, and it's a very emotional reunion. I think about how happy I am when my sons, who are now in their 20s, come to visit after I haven't seen them in a couple weeks. I'm the same way. I meet them at the door. Come on in. Do you want a drink? We should make some food. Here, do you need your dad's sweatshirt to warm up? I treat them like kings. I do. It's so good to see them. In Unity, we look at Bible stories and interpret them metaphysically. We know that all the characters, all the places, all the events are part of our own life and part of our spiritual experience. The Bible is a story of human evolution in consciousness. And Charles Fillmore, our co-founder, said the characters in the Bible are they're part of us, and they're like thought people in our mind. So Jesus is saying in this story that God cares for people who have messed up and made mistakes, no matter what. God is about forgiveness and unconditional love. We see that the Father in the story represents God, and we are the lost child, but we can also look deeper and know that we are both the Father and the Son. The Father and Son are one person. The Father represents our wholeness, our Christ nature, that divine light that lives within each of us. And the Son represents our human nature, our present level of consciousness. So the Son was broke, he was lonely, he was hungry, and he got a job taking care of pigs, which is pretty low for a Jewish man. He even wanted to eat what he was feeding the pigs for who hired him. But it says that eventually he came to himself. He was suffering and he woke up. He remembered who he really was. He was the son of a wealthy father who loved him. He woke up and realized that he wanted to go home, just like your son. Go home to his Christ nature. This part of the story tells us that whatever is going on in our lives, we can always wake up. When we feel like a lost child, we can come home to our inner being, and we know that nothing that has happened is unforgivable. We can be healed, we can be forgiven. We can wake up and return to consciousness. It's a great story, isn't it? And you want to hear the rest? Oh, I think I don't know, danced too much last night. So let's continue. Now, his elder son was in the field, and when he came and approached the house, he heard music and dancing. He called one of the slaves and asked what was going on. The slave replied, "Your brother has come, and your father has killed a fatted calf because he got him back safe and sound." Then he became angry and refused to go in. His father came out and began to plead with him. But he answered his father, "Listen, for all these years I've been working like a slave for you, and I've never disobeyed your command. Yet you've never given me even a goat so that I might celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours came back, who has devoured your property with prostitutes, you killed a fatted calf for him." Then the father said to him, "Son, you are always with me, and all that is mine is yours. But we had to celebrate and rejoice because this brother of yours was dead and has come to life. He was lost and now has been found." Jesus told this part of the story because he knew the Pharisees, the tax collectors, and all those legal experts who were listening to him would identify with the brother, the older brother. The men of status and religious background, they didn't show love or pity or forgiveness for those who didn't meet their standards. In the story, the older brother is angry and jealous and resentful. He doesn't want to come to the house and celebrate. He even makes an accusation that his brother spent his inheritance on prostitutes. Where do you get that? He focuses instead on what he didn't get. He's resentful, and maybe he wants his brother to suffer or pay for his mistakes. It sounds a lot like sibling rivalry, doesn't it? Metaphysically, the Father, the Son, and the older brother are all within us. Can we relate to that older brother? I know I can. I can resonate with that sometimes. He stayed with his father. He did what was expected. And he hasn't had a big party given in his honor. He is expressing this victim consciousness, and he's not open to the joy and celebration of finding what was lost. His love is not unconditional, and his forgiveness isn't flowing. But he does have a choice. The story ends before we know what he does. So Jesus is saying to the Pharisees and to his other listeners that they have a choice. They can choose to be like God, forgiving, extending grace and love and forgiveness to everyone. They can choose to see others as God's children, regardless of their health, their wealth, their status, their sex, their age, any outer conditions. They can choose to forgive the errors and shortcomings of other people and see the good instead. And you know what? We have the same choice, don't we? It's easy to celebrate finding a lost coin, but it isn't always easy to forgive another person for messing up. And we might need to forgive ourselves for making a mistake or traveling to a distant land. Do you feel like a lost child sometimes? So come home. Let's know the truth of ourselves, that no matter what, we can honor our true selves, that Christ's nature that lives within us. And when we come home to our divine light, we celebrate what is lost and we celebrate what is found. We find what's lost and celebrate what's found. In fact, we come to realize that it was never lost at all, was it? It was here within, all along. You are precious, wonderful, amazing lights of God, spiritual beings living in a human body. You are blessed, and you bless everyone here with your love and presence everywhere.